Like all 8-year-olds, I treated my birthday like the most important day of the year. You go months and months before the day picking exactly the right classmates to give invitations to. However, this year my mom wanted to go all out. She gave me enough invitations for my entire class, making sure I knew to tell everyone their parents were allowed to come as well. Not only that, but we spent hours upon hours inside a party city, grabbing any and all kinds of decorations. I can remember not getting a good night's sleep before my party because of how excited I was. My parents woke up around 7 a.m. to start setting up for the party that day, but I must have been awake at least 3 hours beforehand. I can remember bouncing up and down as I watched the first guest pull into our driveway. Jump forward a couple hours and our house looked more like a circus. Kids from my class, their families, and all my family, all eating, drinking, and laughing. All of my friends treating me like a celebrity as they all gathered around me begging for me to open their gift first. It almost makes me nostalgic to go back and have more birthdays as a kid. Almost. I don't know when exactly it started. After the first slice of pizza? Maybe after the last guest had arrived? At some point, time just began to become a haze. While I would definitely say I felt as if I were on top of the world, it felt as if at some point, something like a warmth began to spread over me. Starting at my feet, the feeling spread until every vein in my body felt as if it was being filled with cotton. Events just seemed to happen, but I can't recall the order in which anything transpired. It's the reason why I can't remember when it first appeared. Suddenly I just remember being in front of him, my over-animated cousins and friends all jumping up and down excitedly, their shouts warbled and tainted as the warmth that overcame me morphed into a bizarre feeling of euphoria. A clown almost 7 feet tall. No, was he taller? My eyesight succumbed to this feeling as well as everything waved and stretched like it was peering through glasses made of jelly. He towered over all of the children. Overalls, a button-down shirt, a pair of oversized clown shoes, some big puffy gloves, all normal clown attire, but it wasn't wearing bright colors. Every article of clothing he wore was pitch black, so dark that it somehow stood out. If that makes sense? Almost like his clothes were holes in reality. The thing in black danced and twirled, causing the children around him to erupt in applause. Even I was cheering. I could feel myself cheering, but also, it felt as if I were hearing myself from inside a soundproof room. Muffled and somehow foreign. I can't speak on how long I felt like this. Was it minutes? Hours? I remember my body walking around my house, watching everyone mingle. Every turn felt like it was towards the clown. I turned left and he'd be sitting on a bench, talking with an adult. But then I turned right and he'd be applauding as a young cousin of mine swung wildly at Pinata. I'd back up and I'd bump into him, looking down at me, arms outstretched as if he was asking for a warm hug. Its face was always hidden behind a mask, a chrome mask, perfectly resembling the smile of a human. But nothing about the entity seemed human. There were no eye holes in the mask, just 2 swirls cut into its surface. A brilliant light unlike anything I've ever seen gleamed from the swirls. Every time I think about it, I feel my hands tingle, even to this day. It was ever present, anywhere I looked. Was there more than one? Was I seeing things? The more I moved, the more off-putting and nonsensical the scenes would become. One moment I was watching a clown twist balloons into animals, and the next that balloon animal will be biting away at a happy and willing child, blood covering the animal's head. One second I'll be watching people talk, enjoying food at the party, and the next they'd be stabbing food-covered plastic utensils into each other, all the while smiling, even when those utensils pierced their face. No matter what I saw, the warm feeling that encompassed my body only made me feel blissful. What I remember clearest was somehow stumbling into my house, perhaps in a desperate escape to escape the never-ending mind fog? Or perhaps it was the call of something unknown. I walked into my family's kitchen and felt the state of my confusion climax. The best way to explain the transition would be if I had been wading through a kiddie pool and suddenly dropped into the deep end. I walked into the kitchen to see the clown in black, cradling the bodies of 2 of my classmates. Not just their bodies, but their entrails. He held both of them, one in each arm, and rocked them gently. Both had been disemboweled, their entrails wrapped around them like macabre swaddles. With the carnage in front of me, I should have been afraid for my life. I should have screamed, I should have ran. Instead, I could only smile. It felt as if I was seeing was the most beautiful thing I laid my eyes on. I could only walk closer. I felt a pain spread across my face as my face moved to form a grin far wider than it was capable. My skin stretched gaunt over my face. My eyes pulled unnaturally open, tears forming but not flowing. My eyesight faded in and out until the morbid scene in front of me disappeared. The next thing I know, I'm hanging from a tree. I looked up and hundreds of strands of party string were around my hands, tying me to a branch. All around me, my friends and family all cheer and point at me. I look over the crowd, some covered in blood, some actively bleeding from several wounds. In front of the crowd stood my parents. My dad had his face painted in blood. My mom was smiling, but where were her eyes? There was only 2 gaping holes where they should have been, leaking a thick rainbow fluid. They hug and smile as I feel 2 icy hands wrap around my neck. I feel them squeeze, tighter and tighter. Like a shadow, the thing in black shifts into my vision. Its hands are on my neck. I can't breathe, but I stay conscious. It's smiling, wider and wider, staring into the clown's face. That chrome mask reflects my happy expression. The glow from those spirals overtaking me. I can feel myself slipping somewhere. Is it my mind? Am I sliding somewhere? I feel the clown's grip tighten and tighten until it feels like my neck is the size of a pipe cleaner. And then, I'm in my room. No feeling of confusion and euphoria, just me. I'm standing in front of the window and the sun is rising. I remember everything, but it feels like I'm recalling something that happened years ago. I smell breakfast, and the sweet smell of bacon in the air. I run downstairs to see my parents in the kitchen. The cleanest the kitchen ever been, minus the cooking ingredients scattered around the corner. My mom turns to me smiling, her face uninjured and like it usually does. She tells me she hopes I enjoyed my party yesterday and that breakfast will be ready in a little bit. I nod but turn and run to the window overlooking our backyard. I can see a few party streamers here and there, but nothing other than the backyard has been completely cleared. Was it a dream? Surely it was. But if it was all a dream, why did it all feel so real? As I eat breakfast with my parents, I ask where they got the clown from. They look at each other, then back at me. My dad exclaims they didn't get a clown for the party yesterday, but if I wanted one next year, I just have to ask. My heart jumped, but I tried to push everything aside and not think too far into it. But then I noticed it, a dark spot in the middle of my vision wherever I look. I wiped my eyes trying to get rid of it, but it stays. I tell my mom and she makes an appointment with my eye doctor on Monday. When we get there, the doctor says I have something called solar retinopathy. Says I have a small hole burned into my retina, like I've been staring at the sun into a bright light. Suddenly the image of that chrome face with glowing spirals for eyes pushes itself into my forefront of my mind. I tell myself over and over that it was a dream, but I know it wasn't. From my permanently damaged vision to my 2 missing 8th grade classmates that were never found. The same 2 I'd seen in that thing cradling. I know it wasn't a dream from the injuries and scars I see in some of my friends and family. I'd asked them where they got the scars from, and they simply go blank for a minute before saying they can't remember. I'm 28 now, and I started seeing him again. It only happens on my birthdays, but he's always there. Always at the far ends of my peripheral vision, but always there nonetheless. That clown in black. I come from a quaint little town in Ireland that most tourists would regard as picturesque. We get our fair share of tourists throughout the year as they love to wander around the walking trails that crisscross the outskirts. From the outside, our town would be regarded as perfect, but we harbor a dark secret that only the inhabitants know about. I learned about the secret during my first driving lesson with my mother. I was beyond stressed that morning as my mother is a perfectionist and I didn't want to disappoint her. We started off slowly as she taught me how to drive down the narrow roadways. My hands had a vice-like grip on the steering wheel as I was paranoid that I was going to make a mistake. I kept glancing at my mother out of the corner of my eye to judge her reaction to my driving. We were driving almost an hour and a half when I looked into the rearview mirror and spotted the smiley man sitting in the back seat. I was so shocked that I almost spun the steering wheel and crashed into the ditch. My mother screamed at me to keep driving, and whatever I do, don't turn around. My eyes were fixated on the mirror as I stared at the smiley man who had suddenly appeared in our back seat. His face was somehow clouded in shadow even though it was a beautiful sunny day outside. The only features of his face that I could make out were his eyes, which were a sickly green. His mouth was twisted into a snarling smile that made me want to jump out of the car. I watched in horror as he started reaching out with his long, spindly arms towards me. I was paying so much attention to him that I hadn't taken my feet off the gas pedal, and we were slowing down. My mother slapped me across the face and yelled at me to drive faster. I sped up and watched in relief as his arm slowly withdrew back toward his body. He leaned his head forward and opened his mouth as a plethora of voices began pleading for help. I instinctively covered my ears with my hands, which forced my mother to grab the steering wheel. It took me a few seconds to regain my composure, and I grabbed the steering wheel. My entire body was on edge as the cries coming from his mouth reached a deafening crescendo. In a blink of an eye, the smiley man vanished, leaving me and my mother alone in the car. I pulled the car off to the side of the road and proceeded to vomit out my breakfast. The local police officer drove by and stopped to see what was wrong. He gave me a nod of approval as my mother explained that we had extra guests in our car. We drove home in silence, and I tried to venture the subject with her on a number of occasions, but she refused to talk about it. I learned from a few other people that he has been appearing in cars for almost 70 years. No one knows anything about him, but they all warned me to never turn to face him. I moved away to college a few months afterwards and over time forgot about the Smiley Man. I started dating a guy named Mike that I had met in my history class. We were both a bit shy, so no one knew that we were actually a couple. It started getting serious with Mike, so I decided to bring him home to meet my mother. I was a bit nervous about how she would react to him. We were just driving to town when I spotted the Smiley Man once again sitting in my back seat. The blood drained from my face as we locked eyes in the mirror. Mike suddenly jumped in his seat as we must have noticed the Smiley Man. I shouted at him not to turn around, but it was already too late. The Smiley Man's grin widened as Mike turned in his chair to look at him. There was a blinding flash that caused me to jam on the brakes. I was suddenly drenched in blood and body parts as Mike's body exploded. I climbed out of the car and onto the road, weeping as Mike's body flowed out of the car and pooled on the ground. I was discovered by the same officer who tried his best to comfort me. It took me almost 2 weeks to get myself cleaned up, and I kept finding pieces of Mike in my hair. I went back to college almost 3 months later and felt my heart drop as I spotted posters hanging everywhere with Mike's face plastered all over them. A woman saw me looking at them and asked for help locating her missing son. I excused myself and practically ran away. I didn't have the heart to tell her that her son is buried in a small field in the middle of nowhere. I'm now living with an abusive husband who beats me on a daily basis. I've managed to convince him to travel to my hometown with me, and I hope that I will get an opportunity to introduce him to the Smiley Man during our visit.